You know what the forecasts are calling for? Up to 16 inches of snow in New York. We were just talking to Julie down in Texas. It's going to be massive, potentially amounts of ice, maybe a foot here in the capital. Is that what you're expecting?
Well, if you look at the National Weather Service forecast, I really want to emphasize, we can move snow, we can plow it. But they're talking about catastrophic ice accumulations. As Julie's pointing out, this is the big danger. It's going to cause the most damage, it's going to knock out the most power, and it's going to make response extremely difficult. I think that's what we should be focusing on. These areas that are about to be hit with this ice storm, if this forecast materializes, it's going to be a long duration power outage for a lot of people while they're also experiencing extreme cold.
Talked to Dan Criswell earlier today, who, of course, had the same position you had at FEMA and was, in fact, on the job shortly after that ice storm that wreaked havoc on Texas. She talked about the need to pre-position equipment and resources. Here's what she said.
2/3 of all of the FEMA regions are going to be impacted by this, close to 200 million people. And that's where FEMA has the ability to have these centralized stockpiles of equipment ready to move out to states as they identify any needs. And so the goal here is to pre-position where you can, especially areas that are going to get a lot of snow, because once the snow comes in, it's going to be harder to move those in. But they only do that at the request of the state.
It's pretty remarkable, Craig, to think 2/3, as she said, of all FEMA regions are going to be impacted by this storm. Considering the cuts that the agency has felt, some 14% of the agency over the past year, is FEMA ready?
Well, let's be clear. They're not the initial response. The primary response is going to be state and local governments. And FEMA's primary role, as Dan was pointing out, is moving in some of the limited generators and other supplies. It's really going to be the financial impacts. And, that's going to come back to how bad it is, governor's requests, and the president's acting on it. But the initial response is still going to be state and local governments. And I want to add one more thing. Everybody thinks FEMA's a responder, and they're not. The fastest response in these types of disasters, quite honestly, neighbors checking on neighbors.
Yeah. Well, tell us what FEMA will be doing in states like Texas then.
Well, they're already in or talking with the governors. They did that today. They've already pre-positioned their trucks, their drivers, their equipment. Until they actually start getting specific requests from governors, they're anticipating it. And they're in those state operation centers working side by side. The regional operation centers are stood up. So all of the pieces are in place for tying in those requests for any specific resources the governors have into the federal family of resources, including the Department of Defense. After the storm comes through, assessments will be made and determinations in many of these types of events. It's going to be what are the financial impacts of particularly the impacts of picking up debris if a lot of trees have come down.
What do you make of FEMA's decision to halt these planned terminations? This is FEMA's cadre of on-call response recovery employees, core employees, I think, as you call them. These are temporary workers in 2 or 4 year, I believe, contracts. Should they have been dispatched to begin with? Should they be kept now that this order has been made?
Well, a lot of these folks are in the recovery space. And again, these are people that are tied to disaster funding. So they, in many cases, are full-time, not permanent employees that are tied to disaster work. And that number actually goes up and goes down. Now, the only thing I would ask, if it was a good idea last week to terminate them, what changed today? Because year-round we have earthquakes. It's not like you just do this for hurricane season. So you've got to kind of go back and ask the question, well, what changed since Monday? And don't tell me it's because you got an ice storm, because what happened if you had an earthquake the day after you turn? Either you need them or you don't.
Isn't that something? I talked to Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis about this today, the Republican from New York, who expressed some concern. And, of course, they're bracing for a big hit right now in New York, but suggested that some agencies like FEMA could use a little downsizing. Here's how she put it.
I think that a lot of these agencies do have bloat. There is bureaucracy. There is some savings to be had. I also think that we need to be targeted and use precision when doing this. Like, we can't just fire employees that are needed. So I haven't been able to look at exactly what FEMA has announced here. But certainly I will be very vocal if it's going to be something that would impact my district. Everybody knows there's a lot of bloat and bureaucracy in Washington. And when we can find efficiencies to not only bring our debt down, but to also protect the taxpayers.
Craig, is bloat a word that you would associate with FEMA?
Well, when you look at any government organization, people are always going, you can make changes, you can save, but you got to go back to the basic idea. FEMA's got to support 50 states, the territories, and tribes. There can be multiple disasters at any given time, and they are still recovering from previous disasters. If you want to reduce the workforce, you got to change the process and reduce the overhead. And I don't disagree, but I think too often we talk about FEMA and we forget you really need to look at the Stafford Act, which is the disaster funding mechanism, and the requirements and how that is administered. There's some good legislation that would simplify that. I think if we can simplify those procedures, it will take less staff. It will speed up recovery. It will maintain financial accountability.
Really interesting answer. You might have heard no more snow days in New York City, according to Mayor Mamdani. Was that premature based on what we might see on Monday?
No, I mean, you can ask anybody in government these days. Snow days don't exist. You just work remotely. The only thing that would disrupt that is if the power and internet go down.
Yeah, I don't know. You imagine being a kid without snow days, Craig Fugate? You might not have been FEMA Administrator without those favorite mornings, no?
Well, I grew up in Florida, but my dad was in the Navy, so I did go through a couple of snow days in Maryland and Virginia. They were infrequent. But today, you kind of asked the question, with technology, do you really need to give them a day off? I would like it a day off as a kid. Fair.